Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the person you've been trying to become your entire life is a lie. Not because you're dishonest or because you've failed, but because the version of you that wakes up every morning, dresses for work, smiles in public, sets goals, achieves them, posts achievements, and collapses into bed, that person might be a carefully constructed decoy, a survival mask, a performance curated over years of social conditioning, silent traumas, and unmet needs. Now imagine that beneath this mask, buried deep under layers of routine, identity, and expectation, there's another version of you. A truer one that doesn't care about fitting in or winning approval. One that remembers things you've tried to forget. One that carries your shame, your anger, your unlived desires, and the voice that's been whispering for years, this isn't who you really are. What if you've spent your whole life running from that voice? You see, most people think of self-discovery as a warm, upward journey, a glowing path toward clarity, joy, and personal growth. But the truth is far darker and far more liberating. Because before you can ever meet your true self, you have to face the one you've been avoiding, the fractured, unwanted self, the one that carries your guilt, the one that gets jealous, bitter, vengeful, the one that lashes out silently in moments of powerlessness, the one that hides behind jokes, perfectionism, productivity, or spiritual bypassing. That's the self you don't want to meet, and that is exactly the self that holds your key to freedom. But here's the paradox. The more you avoid it, the more control it has over you. Carl Jung called this disowned part of ourselves the shadow, the unconscious reservoir of all the parts we've been taught to reject. Not just evil or violent impulses, but also creative potential, raw emotion, authenticity, and truth. Jung warned us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So ask yourself, how many of your decisions, your relationships, your fears, your ambitions are really yours? And how many are echoes of a self you're too afraid to confront? What if the anxiety that keeps you up at night isn't a flaw in your biology, but a messenger from within? What if the depression that haunts you is not just a chemical imbalance, but a silent rebellion against a life you secretly know isn't yours? What if your deepest suffering is not something to fix, but something trying to speak? And what if the version of you that you've been told to become, the pleasant one, the together one, the successful one, is quietly killing you? Modern society does not want you to meet your real self. It wants you tame, manageable, predictable. It rewards personas and punishes authenticity. It tells you to love yourself while giving you 1,000 metrics to measure your worth against. It commodifies your identity, then sells you bandages for the wounds it caused. It praises self-awareness, but only the kind that stays on the surface. Anything deeper becomes dangerous, subversive, untamable. Because once you meet the self you've been avoiding, you can't go back. You begin to question things you used to accept. You stop needing the validation of people who don't even know you. You start seeing your patterns, not just the ones you celebrate, but the ones that quietly destroy you. You begin to feel again, truly feel, and that's terrifying, because feeling means grieving, it means rage, it means confronting everything you've numbed for years in order to survive. But here's the greater terror, living a life where you never meet that self, a life of half-truths, quiet desperation, and unspoken regret. So let me ask you, not rhetorically, but truly, urgently, who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when you stop trying to be good? Who are you when all your roles, goals, and titles fall away? And if you don't know the answer, what part of you is keeping it hidden? The self you're afraid to meet is already here, watching you through the cracks of your performance, waiting for you in silence, not to punish you, but to finally be seen. And once you dare to face it, everything begins to change. The hidden problem and its psychological/philosophical roots. You were never taught to meet your shadow, you were taught to hide it. From your earliest years you were trained, not by villains, but by well-meaning parents, schools and cultures, to become a version of yourself that was acceptable, manageable, predictable. You learned which emotions were rewarded and which were punished, which parts of your personality earned love and which drew silence, ridicule or withdrawal. You learned how to be good, and in the process you buried everything that didn't fit. This is not just a psychological glitch. It is the human condition. Carl Jung observed that the path to individuation, becoming a whole human being, cannot occur without first confronting the shadow. The shadow is not inherently bad. It simply contains the parts of ourselves we've exiled in the name of survival. The anger you weren't allowed to express, the tears you were told to hold back, the strange thoughts that scared you, the primal desires that didn't match the image you were trying to uphold. These didn't disappear, they simply went underground. And from there they began to shape your life. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of what Jung called the persona, the socially acceptable mask. The problem isn't the mask itself. We need it to function in society. The problem is when we believe the mask is who we are. In the words of Jean-Paul Sartre, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. But how can we make ourselves consciously when so much of who we are is hidden in the dark? Sartre's existential philosophy forces us to confront the unbearable freedom of human life, that we are not born with meaning but must create it. And yet, when we deny parts of ourselves, we also deny the freedom to create from our full depth. You cannot create your life fully when part of you is in exile. Modern psychology echoes this. Gabor Maté, in his work on trauma and addiction, speaks about how the authentic self is often sacrificed for the sake of attachment. As children, we would rather lose touch with who we really are than risk losing the love of our caregivers. So we split ourselves. We become good boys and nice girls and achievers and people pleasers. We suppress rage, rebellion, intuition. We adopt roles. The smart one, the funny one, the strong one, not because they're true, but because they kept us safe. But what happens when that inner exile becomes permanent? The cost is enormous and mostly invisible. We begin to feel a strange emptiness we can't explain. We seek meaning through consumption, achievement, or constant stimulation. We feel anxious in silence, disconnected in crowds. We become fragmented, our public self smiling while our inner world screams. Arthur Schopenhauer described human suffering as the result of desire, an endless craving that can never truly be satisfied. But perhaps this craving isn't just for things, success, pleasure, validation, but for reconnection, a desperate longing to reunite with the parts of ourselves we were forced to abandon. This is why you feel haunted, not by ghosts, but by yourself. The version of you you're afraid to meet holds everything you've suppressed, and suppression has a cost. Neurologically, the brain doesn't erase experiences, it stores them, especially those wrapped in emotion. When you suppress pain, it becomes embedded in your nervous system. Your body carries it, your reactions reflect it, your relationships mirror it. You may tell yourself, "I'm over it," but your nervous system whispers otherwise. In sleepless nights, panic without cause, or unexplained rage. But here's the deeper tragedy. We begin to defend the very prison we've built. We cling to our false self because it works. It gets us praise. It keeps us liked. It allows us to move through the world without too much friction. And so, even when we feel hollow or unfulfilled, we hesitate to change. Because the idea of facing the truth, of unearthing the shame, the fury, the confusion, feels more terrifying than staying numb. We convince ourselves that self-awareness means learning hacks for productivity or mastering emotional intelligence. But deep self-awareness isn't polished, it's raw. It's the willingness to look in the mirror when the makeup's off, when the mask cracks, when the performance fails, when there's no applause. Nietzsche once said, You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. But modern culture teaches us the opposite. Sterilize the chaos, stay productive, stay positive, smile for the camera, optimize your morning routine, meditate away the darkness. But that chaos inside you, the suppressed anger, the quiet resentment, the hunger for something real, is not a problem to fix. It's a sign that something inside you is still alive. The problem is not that we have a dark side. The problem is that we deny it. And in that denial, it becomes more powerful, shaping our relationships, sabotaging our goals, fueling addictions and obsessions. We project our disowned parts onto others, judging in them what we cannot accept in ourselves. We say, "He's so arrogant," when it's our own power we're afraid to own. We say, "She's so dramatic," when it's our own grief we've refused to feel. We hate in others what we've banished from ourselves. And once more, the cycle continues. A society of fragmented selves, quietly terrified of their own reflection. But what if meeting the self you're afraid of is not your downfall, but your deliverance? What if the darkness you've hidden was never meant to destroy you, but to complete you? You can feel it, can't you? The tug, the presence beneath the surface, the voice you've ignored for years growing louder with every untruth you live. And now you're here, standing at the threshold. Not of breakdown, but of breakthrough. But before you can walk through, you must ask, what have you exiled in yourself just to be loved? And what is it costing you now? The unseen consequences. There's a reason you feel like something's missing, even when everything looks fine. You've done what they told you to do. You've achieved, performed, adapted. You've learned how to hide the chaos behind your smile, to translate your pain into productivity, to turn silence into strength. From the outside, you're holding it together. But inside, there's a quiet fracture. And no one sees it, not even you, not fully. That's what makes the consequences of self-denial so dangerous. They're subtle. They don't announce themselves. They don't scream. They whisper. They hide behind your routines, your habits, your reactions. You don't know you're bleeding because the wound is psychological. Invisible even to your own conscious mind. You wake up with a vague sense of dread you can't explain. You scroll through your phone for hours, chasing something that never arrives. You sabotage relationships the moment they get too intimate. You panic when there's nothing to do. You crave attention and fear it at the same time. You feel guilty for resting and ashamed of your ambition. You laugh at yourself in a way that feels more like self-erasure than self-love. And all the while, you wonder, why do I feel this way? The answer lies in the parts of yourself you've never met. When you exile emotions, they don't disappear. They distort. Repressed anger becomes passive aggression. Buried sadness morphs into numbness. Suppressed desire festers into obsession. The very feelings you've disowned return in twisted forms, haunting you not with violence, but with quiet misalignment. You lose the ability to trust yourself, not because you're broken, but because you're fragmented. There's the version of you who acts, and the version of you who watches from the shadows, unseen, unheard, waiting. This division splits your inner life in two, and the wider that gap becomes, the more alien you feel in your own skin. You begin to mistake the anxiety for your personality. You begin to believe that your overthinking is just how you are. You assume that disconnection is normal because you've never felt what true wholeness is. The unconscious self becomes the puppet master. It sabotages you not out of malice, but because it has no other way to get your attention. Freud once wrote that unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. And neuroscience confirms this. Repressed emotional energy remains active in the brain, often triggering the limbic system, the part of you responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. The result? Your nervous system exists in a constant state of subtle alert, always scanning, bracing, anticipating. You're not relaxed. You're rehearsing for danger, for disappointment, for abandonment. And this chronic internal vigilance becomes your baseline. You call it adulthood, You call it being busy. But beneath it all, there's a nervous system that never got to exhale, a psyche that's been holding its breath for years. But it doesn't stop with you. There are societal consequences to self-avoidance, entire cultures built on repression. We live in a world that punishes emotional honesty and rewards disassociation, where grief is rushed, rage is criminalized, vulnerability is labeled weakness. We are taught to curate identities, not develop them, to perform happiness, not pursue truth. This is not accidental. A self-disconnected population is easier to manage. People disconnected from their depth are easier to market to, easier to manipulate, easier to addict. In Brave New World, Aldous Huxley envisioned a society pacified not by tyranny, but by pleasure. Discomfort was eradicated, suffering numbed, truth replaced by endless distraction. Huxley wasn't just writing science fiction, he was warning us. And in many ways, we've arrived. We self-soothe with screens. We outsource purpose to brands. We replace identity with aesthetics. We chase authenticity only to commercialize it. We create content about vulnerability while staying emotionally unreachable. We follow mindfulness influencers while ignoring our own intuition. We obsess over shadow work as a concept, but panic when real darkness surfaces. This disconnection is everywhere. In our relationships, our politics, our technologies, we argue online about ideas we haven't emotionally embodied. We perform virtue instead of practicing it. We react, project, deflect, and never ask the deeper question. What part of me have I abandoned just to feel safe here? And here's the harsh truth. Everything you avoid within yourself, you will unconsciously recreate in the world around you. You will choose partners who mirror your wounds. You will choose jobs that validate your self-betrayal. You will call it fate. You will call it bad luck. But it will just be your shadow, pulling the strings behind the curtain. And you will keep repeating the pattern until you meet the part of you that you've feared. Until you confront the moment you learned it wasn't safe to be honest. Until you grieve the parts of yourself that were silenced. Until you stop fixing the symptoms and start facing the source. The unseen consequences are not just personal, they are generational. They echo down bloodlines. They shape families. They become cultural codes. Children inherit the shadows of parents who never dared to meet themselves. And so the cycle continues, until someone breaks it. That someone might be you. You feel it, don't you? The discomfort that's rising, the suspicion that your pain is not random, that your anxiety is not a flaw, but a signal, that the emptiness is not evidence of your failure, but the call to return to something you once abandoned. The self you're afraid to meet is not waiting to punish you. It's waiting to integrate you, to make you whole, to return your power, to give you your voice back, to show you how it feels to walk into a room and not need to shrink. But first, you must rebel, not against the world, but against the inner prison you were taught to love. The rebellion starts not with noise, but with silence, not with war, but with truth. And that's where we go next. The rebellion, how to break free. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet refusal to keep lying to yourself. It begins the moment you stop reaching for your phone every time silence falls. The moment you stop numbing your unease with productivity. The moment you choose to sit, even briefly, with the thing you've spent your whole life outrunning. You were trained to survive, but you were not taught how to return. No one gave you the tools to meet the parts of yourself you exiled. So, the rebellion starts as an unlearning, a stripping away of the armor you thought was your skin. It begins when you stop asking, how can I fix myself, and start asking, who taught me I was broken? The world offers 1,000 distractions, but very few maps back to the self. Here's one. Jung called it individuation, the process of integrating all parts of your psyche, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, into a unified whole. This isn't self-improvement, it's self-confrontation. You don't become better by becoming prettier or smarter or more optimized. You become real by becoming complete. And that process is brutal. It means facing the ways you've betrayed yourself just to feel accepted. It means admitting that your suffering gave you a sense of identity you're now afraid to lose. It means grieving the person you had to become in order to survive. But something extraordinary happens when you stop resisting. The parts of you that were once terrifying begin to soften. You discover that the rage you were so afraid of is really the voice of your unmet needs. That the shame you carried was never yours to begin with. That your fear isn't proof of weakness, but the residue of a life spent running from your own truth. Real rebellion is integration. To meet your shadow is not to give in to darkness. It's to stop pretending that only the light is worthy of love. You must reclaim the full spectrum of who you are. There is power in this. Not the loud, performative kind, but the deep, unshakable kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and no longer apologizing for it. The rebellion is not about fighting the world. It's about refusing to fight yourself. That means unlearning the lies that you have to earn your worth, that your feelings make you weak. That fitting in is the same as belonging. That being loved means being less. The two are linked by human will in desire. That healing is linear and enlightenment is painless. It's not. Growth hurts, truth wounds, but it's the pain of awakening, not abandonment. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But here's the deeper question. How do you find your why if you've never truly met yourself? You don't find it in your career or your accolades or the number of people who praise you. You find it in the reclamation of the parts you thought were shameful. Ask yourself, who am I when I'm not performing? That's where the rebellion begins, not in becoming someone new, but in finally daring to be someone true. It may start in solitude, not isolation, but sacred solitude. The space where you can hear your own voice again. Sit with it. Journal without censoring. Speak out loud to your shadow. Say what you've been too afraid to say. Admit what you've buried. Let the mask crack. At first it will feel like death, and in many ways it is, the death of the full self. But what rises from the ashes is yours, is the version of you that doesn't beg to be seen because it no longer hides. The version that doesn't settle for safety because it knows peace can't come from pretending. The version that can finally look in the mirror and not flinch. This isn't easy. You will lose people. Not everyone will understand the new you. Some only love the version of you that made them comfortable. Let them go. The cost of authenticity is high, but the cost of betrayal is higher. You will feel lonely at times, but it will be a sacred loneliness. A space where the soul begins to breathe. A silence where truth finds its voice. And slowly, you'll start to rebuild. From the inside out. Not with borrowed identities, but with chosen truths. You'll recognize which parts of your life were built on fear, and you'll begin to dismantle them. You'll speak with more clarity, love with more courage, walk with more presence. And you'll begin to see others differently too. Because once you've met your own shadow, you stop demonizing it in others. You become less reactive, more compassionate. Not because you've become perfect, but because you've become real. And realness is magnetic. It calls forth depth. It invites others to take off their masks too. That is the silent revolution. Not to change the world by force, but by becoming the kind of person who is no longer afraid to feel. And from that place, everything changes. Not all at once, but inevitably. The life that once felt like a cage begins to feel like clay. You are no longer sculpted by expectation. You begin to sculpt your own soul. But the final truth, the one that reshapes everything, still waits ahead. Because once you meet the self you were afraid of, you realize that the real terror isn't in the darkness. It's in how long you waited to walk into it. He, ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. You're standing alone, in front of a mirror, but not the kind that shows your skin. This one reflects everything beneath it. The fear, the longing, the brilliance, the rot, the child you left behind, the masks you wore for love, the fire you buried to be accepted. It shows you what you are, not what you wish to be, not what the world told you to become. And for the first time in your life, you don't look away. This, right here, is where life begins. Not at your job, not after you achieve the next goal, not when you've perfected your habits or optimized your mindset, but here, in this raw, terrifying, holy confrontation with the self you've spent years avoiding. And here's the ultimate truth. You were never afraid of the darkness within you. You were afraid of your power, the raw, electric force of your unedited, unshackled self. It wasn't the shadow that scared you. It was what would happen if you allowed yourself to stop shrinking. Because deep down, you've always known. If you embraced all of who you are, your anger, your depth, your hunger, your voice, you would no longer fit inside the life you settled for. You'd outgrow the relationships that relied on your silence. You'd disrupt the roles you were given as a child. You'd stop being manageable. And being unmanageable in a world that profits from your obedience? That's terrifying. So you played along. You dimmed your intuition. You wore the right masks. You learned how to disappear while smiling. But the truth has always lived in your body. The tightness in your chest when you say yes but mean no. The sinking in your gut when you betray yourself to avoid conflict. The ache in your soul when you stay quiet just to be loved. These aren't just emotions, they're messages. They are the compass leading you back to the self you abandoned for belonging. And now you're here. You've made it to the edge of the known self, where the false identities crack and the real you waits beneath. This is your return. You are not here to become yourself. You are here to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. All your suffering, your anxiety, your self-doubt, your overthinking, they were never random. They were signals, symptoms of a life lived out of alignment with your truth. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also warned, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because this work, this becoming, requires death. The death of illusions, the death of narratives, the death of the you that was built to please others. You will grieve, you will rage, you will fall apart. But from those ashes, something deeper will emerge. Not a shinier self, not a better you, but the whole you. And wholeness is what you are always longing for. Not happiness, not perfection, not certainty. Just the radical freedom to exist as you are, without shame. When you meet the self you are afraid of, you realize that version of you was never the enemy. It was the protector, the witness, the survivor, the inner child who learned how to disappear, the teenager who learned to perform, the adult who learned to cope. And now, finally, they can rest. Because you've come back, no longer needing to hide, no longer seeking approval in all the wrong places, no longer living a second-hand life. This is the deepest act of love. To turn toward the parts of yourself that were banished and say, you are welcome here, even you, especially you. Because the truth is, the self you were afraid to meet is the one who holds the key to everything. Your voice, your purpose, your passion, your peace. That self isn't the shadow, it's the doorway through it. And once you walk through, you stop chasing your life. You inhabit it, fully, deliberately, without apology. This is the shift, the one that changes everything. Not because the world gets easier, but because you stop abandoning yourself in order to survive it. You speak without shrinking. You feel without censoring. You choose without fear. And most of all, you see, You see how deeply asleep most people are. You see the lies that pass as normal. You see the cages people decorate and call comfort, but you no longer participate. You build a life aligned with your truth, even if no one claps, even if it's messier, slower, lonelier at first, because it's yours. And in that ownership you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be impressive, but because you're whole. Others will feel it. They'll sense the difference. And some will leave. But the ones who stay will meet you. The real you, the one you reclaimed. And that, right there, is the revolution. Not to become someone more, but someone true. To finally live in a way where your outer world mirrors your inner reality. To be so rooted in self that no system, no story, no person can make you forget again. So here you are, at the end and the beginning. The self you feared was not your enemy. It was your threshold. You walked through it. And now you are free.